Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome to this Quarto crash course. So in this video, we will start with the absolute basics. What is Quarto? Why should you use it? How do you set up and install Quarto? And then throughout the video, we will showcase a lot of the features and functionality of Quarto, and we'll end with some more advanced topics. Overall, there should be something in this video for everyone, whether you're a complete beginner or you use Quarto as an integral part of your day-to-day workflows. The goal of this video is to have something for everyone, to present interesting and useful concepts about Quarto in a succinct manner. A timeline for this video can be seen on the screen as well as in the video description. Feel free to jump around, watch what you want, skip sections, do whatever. Let's jump right into it. All right, to start, what is Quarto and why should you use it? Well, the way that I like to think about Quarto is that as developers, as data scientists, we typically have a way that we like to edit and run code and run analyses. And that might include using VS Code, writing Python scripts, writing code in Jupyter notebooks, etc. And these formats, they're great for us, but they're not always the most friendly to less technical people, business stakeholders, etc. So where Quarto comes in is that it's an open source scientific and technical publishing system that's all based around these Quarto Markdown files. So with Quarto, you can ultimately output these Quarto Markdown files into very digestible formats such as slideshows, HTML websites, PDF analytics reports, dashboards, etc. So you can really bridge the gap between yourself as a data analyst, data scientist, software engineer, and these stakeholders. So let's see how we can install Quarto. Then we'll walk through a couple of Markdown basics before getting into Quarto-specific Markdown and the features you have access to when you use Quarto and VS Code. To get started with Quarto, you can look up Quarto install. Click on the Get Started page. The URL is quarto.org/docs/get-started. There's a few ways to set up Quarto. One is you can download the Quarto CLI, install it, and then you should have access to the command line interface. And then I recommend clicking on the VS Code option to follow how to set up the extension. Alternatively, you can use a terminal, and I'd recommend creating a virtual environment. So I'm going to create one in my M's directory called Quarto. I'm going to go ahead and activate that, so I can do that by doing source. I think I can just do, with Mac, I think I can just do M's, Quarto, bin, activate. And I might actually have to do source first. So now we see that we have activated the Quarto virtual environment, and I can then go ahead and do a pip install Quarto-CLI. So either install Quarto using this button right here, or you can do it the terminal way I just shared. Once you've done that, go to a directory that you want to edit some Quarto-related code. So I'm going to do that in a directory I have called code, then I have a directory called Quarto, and then I'm going to navigate into this folder I have called Quarto Crash Course. I've shared some code on GitHub that is related to this crash course. You can feel free to check out the link in the YouTube video description, keithgalley/Quarto-crash course, to find a bunch of information on Quarto. I've linked that in the description. But you also are free to work wherever it makes sense to you. And then I'm going to open this up in VS Code by doing code:/. Okay, so now I'm in my Quarto Crash Course directory. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to install first the Quarto extension. So you can open up your Quarto extensions. You can look up, so on MacBook, you can do Command-Shift-X to open this window. You can also go up to the top, go to View, and then click on Extensions to also open this. And you're going to look up Quarto, click on it, and make sure to have this installed. Then we're going to go back to our folder, and we're going to create a file called Quarto, or how about we just call this index.qmd. QMD stands for Quarto Markdown, and it is the format that we use to generate all the different formats that Quarto can ultimately output. To confirm you have everything set up correctly, you should be able to do something like title, you can just follow my lead here, and then add some Markdown. And to confirm that everything is installed correctly, you should have this little option over here on the top right if you're using VS Code. There are other code editors that you can use. As we can see on this screen, feel free to look at the option that makes most sense to you. You might click on this text editor option if you don't see something listed, and there'll be a few different other options there. If you are using VS Code though, we should see this VS Code Quarto extension up here on the top right. Click that, and we should see our Quarto over here. Let's start this tutorial by really quickly talking about Markdown. So right now we've already set up some basic Quarto Markdown, but we'll start by just looking at Markdown. So this first thing that we see here in Markdown is a header. So this is an H1 tag. We specify that by doing just £1. We could also do slightly smaller headers by doing £2. We could do even smaller headers by doing £3, and so on. If I render this, we see all of that. Other things that you can do in Markdown is a list of items. You could also do numerical lists, a numbered list. We could add hyperlinks by doing stuff like this. We could add images by doing something like this. You can look up Markdown Basics and you'll find all sorts of great resources. I could do bold text. I could do italicized text. So a bunch of things here. Go ahead and run this, and we see all of this different stuff with our basic Markdown. If you are curious about Markdown, I recommend looking up Markdown Basics, Quarto, and you should find a page that has a bunch of the different options of Markdown that you can use. And Markdown is pretty universal. There's slightly different flavors of Markdown, but the base things that you see on the screen right here will work in any sort of Markdown renderer. And one place that you might have seen Markdown before is if you're ever working on a GitHub repo, you'll probably have a README file that looks like this. And a cool thing is, if you ever wanted to, you could always render that with Quarto as well, just so you could see your README in a nice, clean manner. Whereas sometimes looking at the raw Markdown can be a little challenging. All right, now that we've covered some basics of Markdown, let's actually get into Quarto Markdown specifically and why Quarto is so helpful. So whenever you're starting up a Quarto Markdown file, I recommend starting with these 3 dashes. And I also recommend, if you're using Visual Studio Code, to close your 3 dashes. So right here in between these dashes, we can specify all sorts of YAML settings for our Quarto Markdown. So we can do things like specify an author. We can specify a title. And we can see the reason that I like to have these fully closed is that you'll start getting autocompletes if you're using VS Code. I will call this Quarto Crash Course. And then we can add a subtitle. Perfect. I'm using GitHub Copilot behind the scenes too. That's how you're seeing all these autocompletes. We could specify a date. So it is 2024, 11/11 right now as I record this. Convenient for us here in the United States as well as people abroad that use different day and month orders here. So I'm very thankful that it works for all of us right now. Let's think of other things. Like one thing I like too is like you can just kind of start typing something. So if you ever forget what an option is, start typing in what you might think it is, and you can see all these nice helpful autocompletes. But I think this is a good starting point. We have some settings here, and we can go ahead and maybe add a header. This is a quick guide to Quarto, and I can render this. We see that these YAML options gives us this nice look to our rendered document, and then we can include our standard kind of markdown to render other elements. One of the first things that you'll want to know about Quarto is that we have the options to render all sorts of different types of outputs with Quarto. So by default, we're going to be rendering a HTML file, but I could very easily specify format, and I could say something like PDF. And now if I run this, we see we have a PDF document here, and it looks a little bit different, but nicely enough, it still is formatting things. I could specify a Revealjs format, and if I add a little bit more information, we can see that when this is rendered as a Revealjs format, it actually creates a slideshow. We'll dive into the details of all these different formats in a little bit, but it's good to know that you have all of these options. Let's delete this real quick, and we'll leave it as the default HTML format. Another thing you'll start to notice is that we start adding all of these files over here, and it can get a little bit messy if we are generating tons and tons of different documents. So one thing that I like to do is that you can specify this special kind of project formatting file called _quarto.yaml, and in it you can do project, and you can do output directory, and I could specify something like outputs. And now when I run this index.qmd, we'll see that instead of creating the outputs in our standard root directory, it's actually putting them in this outputs folder. So also move index.pdf there too. We also really start seeing the benefit of Quarto when we start seeing what types of things we can embed in our Quarto docs. So by including these 3 tick marks, so this is right above the tab mark on my keyboard, you can insert R code, you could insert Python code, you could insert Julia code, etc. So I'm going to insert some Python code. So I'm going to add this brackets Python, and then I'm going to close the brackets, and I'll do something like, I don't know, print hello world. I could make this even more fancy. I could do something like for I in range 10, print hello world. So nothing crazy. I can run the cell, and we see 10 hello worlds. One thing that is cool is I can go ahead and generate this as a Quarto Markdown document, or render it as HTML. And we see now the code nicely formatted, and the output is embedded in our Quarto doc. So the combo of like using this markdown and also embedding code and the output of the code, such as visualizations, easily using this Quarto Markdown format is super, super helpful. Some of the features of Quarto, though, you might not always remember. So one thing that I also like to highlight is that there's also a visual editor. So if I right-click, I see that there's this option to edit in visual mode. So this is available in VS Code. It might be available in some of the other text editors as well, but I know that it works well here in VS Code. So if I say edit in visual mode, now I get this new interface that is easy for me to do different things if I forget the Markdown specific syntax. So I could create a, let's say, insert a new code cell. I could insert a table here. So maybe I wanted a 3x3 table with the caption example table. we get something that looks like this: column 1, column 2, column 3, and I could add all sorts of information into this table. Look at that, the alphabet. So tables, I could also insert, let's say, like maybe I forgot how to insert an image. I could, very easily upload an image this way. I could insert a citation. So this is pretty cool. So let's say you need to cite an article or something. Oftentimes they have this DOI link. So like in this tutorial specifically, we will be using some movie dataset data. And I originally got it from Kaggle. So one thing that I could do via this visual editor is I could open up a Chrome window. I could go to the Kaggle dataset that I got this from. So I type in Kaggle. And I specifically use this full TMDB movies dataset. I'll make sure it's linked in the GitHub / maybe the video description so that you have access to this. But basically, there's this DOI citation. I can copy this digital object identifier. I can go back to my VS Code window. I can paste this in. And now we see that we have the option to embed specifically this link. If I now insert that, we see that we have a citation. And if I render this, we see we have our table, we have our citation that we just added, and we even get automatically this reference page. So some of the stuff, especially like the citations, I feel like I might not remember how to do exactly with the Markdown specifically. So this visual editor is super, super helpful. And we can easily go back to the source mode by right-clicking and editing in source mode, and we see we have things that are added here nicely that might not have been easy to do if you just were trying to memorize all of the Markdown. You see that it also added this bibliography page too. One other really cool thing for Python developers out there, or maybe anyone that uses Jupyter notebooks, is we also can edit our Quarto Markdown as a Jupyter notebook. So you can either start it as a Jupyter notebook, or one cool thing is that you can easily convert an existing Quarto Markdown file to a Jupyter notebook by doing Quarto convert index.qmd. And now we see we have an index.ipython notebook. And so if you prefer to work with IPython notebooks such as this, you can easily have a Jupyter notebook, and you can even render this Jupyter notebook. So if I added another code cell, so how about I did something like I equals 0 while I is less than 10, print, instead of hello world, how about we print I? Some really exciting advanced code here. Python environment. Okay, we have this, and now I could go ahead and with my terminal, I could do Quarto render, and I can render this index.ipython notebook. And I do get, and we see our index.html. I guess it didn't output it in the outputs folder that is kind of the standard way with our QMD. There might be an additional setting that you can do that, but it is cool to know that you can directly output it via the IPython notebook. And if we look at it, we do get all these code blocks. For now, I'm going to stay in working with the Quarto Markdown file. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I'll delete this index.html as well. And we'll stick with this index.qmd. And I might clean up some of this stuff temporarily. Let's say we wanted to style certain sections of our Quarto document in one way, and we wanted to style other sections in a different way. We can use what is known as a fenced div. So let's say we wanted to add some custom styling to this second header and kind of that whole section. So a fence div can be specified with any number of colons. I think it's any number. It might need to be 3 or more, but as long as you match the colons, that's really what's most important. And then within this fence div, we can specify some classes. So this is going to be a class, whatever our class name is. And then we also have access to these sometimes classes. And I'll specify when you don't use the dot and when you use a dot. I think it's easiest to start with just looking at using the dot. Well, Quarto gives us access to some special things. And the typical way that I figure out what I have access to is that I could go to the documentation. And in the README, there's a page that I find quite helpful, which is so if you look in the documentation, you'll find specific options, such as here we see an example of a class called panel tab set. And if we use this, there's different types of built-in classes. So panel tab set is an example of a built-in class. If we add that to our Visual Studio code, so let's do panel tab set, and how about I actually make this fence div all of this? Now what we're going to see, if I run this, is 2 tabs set up as a panel. So that's one built-in option. Use the documentation to help you find these different built-in options that we have available to us. Another thing we could have done is, let's say instead of using the panel tab set, how about I define a class as just called very red. So there's nothing actually called very red. So if I run this, nothing happens when I surround it with very red. But if I go ahead and add an additional file, so right now we have these files. If I add an additional file called styles.css, and I define a HTML, or I guess a CSS class called very red. So I specify the class with the period, and then I make the color red. And now if I run our file that is surrounded in the fenced div with the class very red, we see that it is not red. And why is it not red? Because we also need to specify CSS here and specify that file called styles.css. Now if we rerun it, we see that it is very red. And you can do this. This is super, super useful. So if you ever need custom formatting, custom styling, etc., leveraging some cascading style sheets, some CSS, can be very, very powerful. And you can add classes here. You could add IDs. So I could do some other format here. I could make this font style italic. And now if we look at this, if I then surrounded, how about this with ID, some other format, and closed it off with 4, we'll see that this gets italicized. So now it's italicized. And I think it's cool to understand what's happening under the hood. So under the hood, if we look at our output file in our index.html, we look for that second header. So we have the second header, or some more text. And we see that this is given the class level 2, and it's given the class very red. We see that that whole section is encapsulated in this class that includes the very red that we specified. If we instead how about added an image? So in here we added an image, and maybe if I'm lucky, maybe it will know a URL of a Shrek image. Okay, it doesn't, but I could paste in a URL of a Shrek image. I could paste in a picture of Shrek, and if I run this, we see we got Shrek there, and some text. And one cool thing is that we could also maybe specify the width equals, how about 400 pixels. We rerun this. We got a bigger Shrek. And I think the thing that's interesting here is why we're able to do width 400 pixels instead of like dot width or something like that, 400 pixels. And this kind of like, I think a good rule of thumb is that we can sometimes use a class or like an attribute without a period if we're specifically wanting to add that attribute to the ultimate like HTML that gets rendered. So what I mean by this is if we now look at the index.html and we look at the picture of Shrek that has been added, if we look at the image, we see that it adds this width equals 400 as like its own attribute. So instead of adding like a class variable here, it adds it specifically as width, but I could add my own class to the Shrek image by doing, dot. Think that we need to specify classes and IDs first. So I could do like Shrek class width equals 400 pixels. If I render this, look at my index.html, we see that now it has class Shrek class. So use this as you see fit. You can kind of style things specifically, based on this information. And I think one thing to note is that there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different like built-in options that you can use with these fenced divs. For example, if we were working off of a Revealjs doc, it's like a cool thing I can do with the Revealjs with a fenced div is I could add a list. So if we look at this, by default, it looks like this. But if I added a fenced div with the class incremental around this section, and you could only, you could surround it by around just the list. I don't think that it will affect this header at all. We run that. Or actually, I guess I have to specify it right around the list. We run that. Now it comes in at one at a time. And if we looked at the documentation for this, and we looked up Revealjs, we'll see that incremental is one of the options that we have access to. And if we went to, how about reference Revealjs, one thing that you'll see as you start looking through the documentation for whatever format that you're working off of is you'll see some notes sometimes included. So like if we wanted to set the footer, we can do that using our top level YAML config, but we also can do it by setting like a fenced div with footer, for example, or a fenced div with the smaller class. So we can see that real quick. So I could add a fenced div with the smaller here in addition. So there's now two classes on this. And if we looked at our list, it's a bit smaller than it was before. So rerun that again. Let's just double check. We're going to surround this whole section as smaller. We're using 4 divs now, or 4 colons to say all of this is within the other stuff. So now we see that this is all smaller. If I remove this, It's going to be a bit bigger. Cool. So that's fence divs. This is, editing specific elements. So in addition to fence divs, you could also edit things in such a manner called a bracketed span. So if you wanted to just edit like some specific text, and you only wanted to make maybe this here red, I could do this, and we see that that is specifically red. So you can do bracketed spans like this and customize certain elements and attributes of that. You could also add like a style equals font size. Maybe it's very big here, like 500. That's probably too big. 72 pixels. We'll see that this is probably a lot bigger than the other elements. So you can do stuff like this. Trying to think if there's anything else that's worthwhile talking about here. That's styling. We'll spend another couple minutes real quick on formatting as well. Building on this, let's remove all this code real quick and just have some example headers again. Some cool things that you might want to do here with fenced divs is a layout. So we can do layout, or we can do specifically layout equals something like 30 and then 70. And how about the next one is 100. So this is a special layout format. And if I close this and then I add 3 paragraphs of text, so this is some text about a cat. A cat. Okay, this is some text about a dog. This will all make sense in a second. And then we added, okay, so we have 3 paragraphs and we specified a layout for these 3 paragraphs. If we look at what this looks like, we see that we get it laid out in the page in a certain format. This can be very helpful if we want to, like, let's say instead of having this text, embed an image. I wonder if this image will actually appear. And you can, just basically showcase text and whatnot in a certain way. And we're still using the Revealjs format. This makes another probably option that's cool to see. I could add dot scrollable. I bet you that we'll see everything now. Maybe not. But if we made this, let's say, back to the HTML format, we see that it is formatted with this specific format. We can also add things like, do something specifically like layout number of columns equals 2. And now what this will basically do is it will keep 2 columns no matter how many paragraphs we add. So I could just keep adding, this is could just keep adding paragraphs. And what we'll see is it always formats it with 2 columns. So we see a bunch of different 2-column formatted things. You could easily change this to 3 columns, and it's formatted 3 columns, 4 columns, etc. So very, very useful if you want certain things to wrap and format always in a certain way. So good to know. Basically, I feel like if you're looking for some sort of customization option, it's there for you. You just have to sometimes do some browsing through the documentation. Real quick, I want to touch on parameters with Quarto, as well as some CLI options that you have when you want to render something dynamically in Quarto. So if you go to this Quarto webpage, docs/computation/parameters, you can find some information on both Jupyter-based execution and knitr, so whether you're using Python or R, as well as some information on what you can do with these parameters. But to see this in action real quick, if we want to add our own custom parameters, so let's say we wanted to generate reports and we wanted to switch up variables for each execution of the report, we could add to our Quarto Markdown this special parameters tag. And then we could define custom variables like name equals Keith, and then maybe a data filter. So in this video, we are going to be doing some stuff with a movie data set. So you can imagine that maybe you wanted to filter by comedy or something. And then we can close this Python cell. And then later on, and somewhere in our notebook, we can utilize these variables. So I could very easily down here add some more Python code. And I could maybe, print my name and print the data filter. You could obviously do any sort of Python execution with this, but now we have the code that looks like this. And if we run this, right, we see that it says Keith and comedy, and we see it prints out Keith and comedy down here. One thing that you might want to do, this is just a good to know, is maybe you didn't want this code to show. You could add a echo is false here. And what that will do is it will hide all of the code cells from your doc. And so now we just see the output here. You also change it on a per code block basis by doing the following. So the # and the pipe is a special kind of syntax in Quarto, but I could add echo is true here. And so we will actually see these print statements show up along with their execution. Okay, so we see that. And now the cool thing is that I could go ahead and I could run something like Quarto render index.qmd. I can pass in parameters. So maybe I wanted to set my name to be something like Elizabeth. And maybe I wanted to set my other parameter to be something like, so we have this called data filter. Maybe I wanted it to be actual, drama movies. So now if I run this, we see we get a new output in index or outputs.index.html. If I look at that file, or actually it already re-rendered over here, we see Elizabeth and drama. So you can run these and render these Quarto Markdown files with other parameters. And this is really helpful if you want to generate custom reports based on certain variables. You can also, even though this is specified as HTML, you can also use the command line to do useful things like rendering it to a specific format. So I could do Quarto render index.qmd to PDF, and we'll see a new PDF be generated in here. So if I open this up, we see we get something like this, and we see that it can take those variables in as well. Some useful, simple command line interface options and parameters. One other potential thing you might want to do is, in addition to specifying these parameters, you can actually, via the CLI, change up some of these metadata settings. So I could do Quarto render index.qmd. I could pass in this -m, and maybe I would want to set a table of contents equals true in this situation. So we haven't actually seen this parameter, but if I now open up our index.html, we see that it gets this table of contents. I could also, let's say, maybe I wanted to change the title of this. So right now it's saying Quarto Crash Course, and maybe I wanted to change that to, so that's our title metadata parameter. I'll make this a little bigger so everyone can see. Quarto render index.qmd. I wanted to set the title to, how about, and this might be a little bit interesting because we have spaces in it, so you might have to do quotes. I'm not sure if this will work or not. We'll see. You might actually have to surround all of this in like quotes like this. My fancy new title. Let's see if this works. Open up the index.qmd, and look at that, it does work. So you can pass in metadata as well. Useful stuff to know about. All right, let's go ahead and talk about some more advanced things with the HTML output format, as well as publishing our HTML or any Quarto files to a public place where you have a link that you can share with your teammates to easily kind of navigate data or some sort of dashboard or report. So right now I am working off of the GitHub repo that is shared in the description. So that is github.com/KeithGalley/Quarto Crash Course. There's a bunch of QMD files and whatnot in there. You can check it out. You can go ahead and clone the repo and get all of this locally. You also don't necessarily need to work off of this, but it has some helpful things, such as this helpers.py file that has just some code that I wrote to visualize different graphs and whatnot. Using these helpers.py, we can start actually embedding very useful analysis into our Quarto reports. So there's a file in here called htmlreport.qmd. If we go ahead and look at this, we can see some pretty cool stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And if you don't have all of the packages, I recommend doing a pip install -r requirements. And that's going to be based off of the requirements.txt file in this repo. So these are the libraries. So you'll need to have this requirements.txt file locally for this to work, but I do that and it doesn't work for me. I guess I spelled, I didn't add the txt here. Cool. Now I can try running this file again. And we see we get that's all sorts of analysis on a movie data set. So the data that they're talking about right here is found in the data directory, tmdb small. So I mentioned previously in the video that all of this came from a Kaggle source, which can be found here. And basically, this tmdb small data set that you see is all of the movies from that data set that have 1,000 ratings or more have been kept, and it just made the data a lot more manageable to work with. One cool thing you can do in VS Code is I could preview this. So we see what types of data that we have in this data directory. If we go back to our HTML report, we see that we load in that data. We see that we import some of our functions from the helpers file. And then we can go ahead and utilize some of these functions. So let's look at what that looks like again. So we see our report over here. And it's a combination of Markdown as well as the actual Python code. One cool thing is like this plotly scatter plot is interactive, so you can do all sorts of cool things with it. We also see, like, for example, for this Python figure, we've added some specific features such as fig align center and fig caption movie release year by release year distribution. If we run this, we see that that appears here as well as it's centered on the screen. We can change up the size of the figure as well so that it doesn't overflow, or we could change up the margins or something. But I think if we actually just spread this out a little bit, it will see it pretty much fully. We also see that we are both generating an HTML file and a PDF file here. So if I click on PDF, just from this HTML file alone, you can generate the PDF. So this is cool because imagine you wanted to share this easily with a teammate. You could just generate the PDF, share the PDF. But sometimes interactivity is very important. So like you wouldn't be able to interact with a Plotly chart like this if you only sent the PDF. So that's where hosting your Quarto Markdown files on a place like Posit Connect Cloud can be very helpful. You can click the link in the description to get to Posit Connect Cloud. Once you're there, you'll show up to a place like this. You can sign up for free. I recommend signing up with your GitHub. And as long as the repo that you're working off of to generate your QMD files is public, you can very easily connect it to Posit Connect Cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'm logging in with my GitHub. And if I go ahead and click publish, I want to publish specifically Quarto. I'm going to use the Quarto crash course repo. I'm working off of master right now, and I can specify a primary file. So in this case, it would be HTML report.qmd. I can go ahead and publish this. And that will run some things. And just to see what that will look like, I did this previously. And we get our report. You can play around with settings and resize things as you need. But cool, I could go ahead and just take this link right here and I could share this with someone. I'll even share it in the description of the video so that you can go ahead and play around with these charts. So what's really cool about this is we can see, okay, some of the top movies, all of that. I could zoom in, see, more movies. I could zoom out, and maybe I just want to toggle certain types of movies to show up here. So maybe I just wanted to do comedies. So there's one other, and now I have just comedies here. I can see what the top comedies are as well as the worst comedies. Epic movie, The Room. Pretty cool. Zoom in, play around with this. And yeah, you can share this with teammates and they can also play around with it. So super, super helpful. One thing that I should mention though is that if you do have a quarto.yaml, file in your directory or in your repo, that can sometimes cause issues when you specify the primary file that you want to generate on Posit Connect Cloud. If you want only certain files to render, you can specify, only render HTML report.qmd, or you could do render all QMD files. You could say don't render index.qmd. There's a lot of different parameters that you can pass here, and I think I would actually have to surround this with quotes to only render certain files. One other cool thing that we can do here is another fence div option in class that we have is we can add this content visible when format equals HTML fence div around some of our code. So for example, this Plotly code, not super useful when we have a PDF report. So if I looked at the PDF report that was generated when we ran this code, we see that it doesn't include that Plotly chart. A final thing about this HTML report thing that I wanted to share is that you could actually use Python inline as well. So from our data frame, we are grabbing a random row from it. We are grabbing a poster image from that is on the moviedatabase.org. That's where all the data comes from. It's ultimately aggregated from there and then moved to Kaggle. But we can get the movie image from there. And then based on whatever row we got, we can dynamically, set values, set headers, set bold text in our rendered file, just, dynamically. So I run it this time, we see we get American Assassin. If I run it again, we see we get this movie Flatliners. Cool to be able to do that with this inline Python code. Moving along, we also have this file in this repo called PDF report. And I just want to show some additional things that you can do with static documents. So I've set it as a format PDF. We see that we get a document looking like this. One thing that I think might be useful is sometimes you'll want to change up your text to be in columns. So similar to what we showed earlier in the video, we could do something like, add a layout. So this explicitly is meaning 33% for the first column, 66% takes up the second column. And then when we add items in that, we have it take up those sizes. And in the text here on the right, we can also add certain classes like flush right and add this data latex that allows us to align our text to the right. I run this, we see that it is taking up that space kind of how we expect. I'm trying to think of other cool things here with PDF reports specifically. One thing that I find quite useful is being able to do page breaks. So if you look at the Quarto documentation, there's some special syntax that we have available to us. So I'm going to go to Overview, or maybe Guide. Somewhere in here, I think down over here in Projects, there are some maybe environment variables. Is that what I'm looking for? No, not environment variables. Maybe it's in Project Basics. Oh, this is more on the Quarto YAML file, what you can do with that. Somewhere in here, we can find about project scripts, a lot of good stuff in here. Maybe it's in advanced, actually. Okay, yeah. I think maybe it's in page layout. More useful stuff here. You can include content from other QMD files using this include bracket. Still not finding what I want with the page break. I'm going to explicitly look up page break Quarto. Okay, short codes, it looks like. We have some short codes that allow you to do different things. So like we see page break here. Lets you separate pages. I find that super useful. This looks like there is some useful stuff. I guess this was just on the Markdown Basics page. But if we look at what this does when we render it, so let's say I wanted to add a page break after every section. So we have one there, we have one there, we have one there. We could add one right here. We're going to see all of our sections separated, all of our headers separated by pages with our PDF. And the concept of pages only really makes sense when you have a Word document, when you have a PDF document. So we see that it's kind of working as we expect. This code is not showing up because we have echo equal false, but I could also add the code to the screen, doing echo true. So we see the code alongside the outputs. We could also generate a Docx file here by doing format Docx. If I run this, we now see in our output we have this Docx, and so you can feel free to open that and edit things as you need to. So I could edit the text in here. This is great if you are working with someone else on your team and you need to generate a template and then they can fill in the rest of the details. So maybe this was some descriptive columns that they needed to fill out. They could edit the Word doc and then go ahead and save it as a PDF. Another thing you might want to do is add a table of contents. We're going to change this back to a PDF. We see we get this PDF, and one thing that's cool is it automatically knows what page each things are on. So I could click on random movie. It goes down to the random movie section of our document. Cool stuff, word cloud, etc. So that is some information that is good to know about static documents. Next, let's talk about dashboards in Quarto. Also very, very easy to create. So I'm going to call this new dashboard.qmd. And with dashboards, we're going to start it the same way. Create these 3 dashes, open and closed. I will make the format here specifically dashboard. And now we render this. We see, I guess we get nothing here. I should probably give it like a title at least. So title is my new dashboard. Run this one more time. We get a nice looking dashboard title banner. And then I can start adding some sections to my dashboard. So maybe I have one on movies by rating versus number of votes. And I'll pass in the same Python code that I had previously, which is in the helpers file. So I could do from helpers import, and let me just see what the function was called. I think it was one of the one that uses Plotly. What was the one that uses Plotly? Oh, the Plotly one actually was rendered inline, but I could just do like plot top movies by rating. So I'll just call this, I think, column 1. Import plot top movies by rating. I don't need to, because we're importing it from helpers, I don't need to pass in all the code. And then we also want to import pandas. And I also recommend maybe using pathlib. I know previously I used just used a string to get my data frame, but I could do something like file path equals path to this specific file. We get the parent of this file. We go into the data directory, then grab movies.csv, but it's actually called tmdb small. Let's confirm with a capital S. And then I can get the data frame. And maybe I actually want to do this code before I actually get into things. And then we can make this a little simpler. And all we have to do in this cell is import the function and pass in the data frame. We run this. Okay, it's yelling at me, so I'm going to just do it the old-fashioned way. Run this. We see we get our movie here. If I add another plot here, so I could also add, let's see what other functions we have access to. Plot revenue versus budget, how about we do that one? On this. So we see this. We see that each time we add a new code block within this column, so I guess this is actually a row, they get stacked side by side. But if I added another row, and then let's add, how about that Python code that created the scatter plot. So right here we have it. I'm going to make a new Python cell, add this scatter plot, close it up. And so now we see this. we see that this takes up the full one because we've specified a row here, and every code cell that we put inside of this row will start stacking. So if I moved all of this code over into our previous row, and I know this is quite small, but I just want to show for example, we see we have 3 columns and it fills up the top. And we could keep doing this. So I could add another row and we see we get this. I guess we're being a little aggressive, but you can, do all sorts of cool stuff with this. Another cool thing that you can do, so how about move one of these rows to the top. And I'll zoom in again just so you can see better. Another cool thing that we have access to are what's known as value boxes. So if I do Python and I specify that I want to do a, let's check value boxes real quick. So I'm going to go to dashboards. I could just click on an example. These are the value boxes I'm talking about. So if I go to dashboards, I'm in the gallery right now. If I click on source code, we'll see that it does value boxes like this. So I'm going to just copy one of these. These icons are coming from the Bootstrap icons. So if you look up Bootstrap icons, I'll put this in the description. You have access to all of these different icons. So we'll see that in 1 second. But I want to copy all of this code. And then go back to our dashboard. And I will paste in I feel like I screwed something up. Let's see. Does it look good? Okay. Run this. There's no function called get price, so I could just do something like, how about 255 here? I need to make sure that this is closed. And now we run this. We see you get a value box. I could go ahead and copy this, paste a couple of these in. Now we have 3 different value boxes. I could very easily change up the icons of these. So going back to that Chrome tab. Maybe I wanted an envelope for one. I just need to copy the name that we see here. I could look up something like, maybe I wanted a flag. They have a lot of icons. So to see how we embed those, you just need to take the name that we see here. So if I wanted to do flag for one of these, then maybe I wanted to do envelope for one of these. And then I could do things based off of our data frame. So I could do like number of movies. So maybe I said our title here is number of movies. And maybe that would just be length data frame. Maybe this is average rating or something like that. I could then paste in data frame, the column of vote average, and take the mean of that. So we can start all doing, actual useful stuff here. Could do an F string that might make this helpful. I do float. Actually, it will be a float by default. So I'm going to pass in F string. Then there's this cool F string syntax. I could do .2f to get it to just round to 2 decimals. Run this. We see we get the average rating of all of our movies. Another thing we can do is, right now this is row formatted, but I could easily change these to be the columns by doing orientation. and I could do instead columns. We get it looking like this. Another cool thing that you can do is you can add different tabs. So imagine that you wanted to have one tab for comedy, and all of the comedy movies were under that, and one tab for, how about horror? And so this is specified specifically with a level 1 heading. So we have comedy at a level 1 heading, horror at a level 1 heading, content here. Now we see we have all the comedy stuff under that first heading 1. We also could put a bunch of stuff under this section, this other heading. So a lot of cool stuff that you can do with dashboards very easily using this Quarto Markdown syntax. We could also add like titles nicely into some of these certain graphs. So I could, let's say, add a title to this one by adding a parameter using the pound pipe sign. I could then add the caption. This is the revenue versus budget. And if we run this within a code cell, so if we add the title, we see that it gives it this nice title. You can do that with any of these. So you can kind of play around with different parameters and make this really your own. You include all your Python code. A lot of cool stuff that you can do with this. So next, let's talk about slides in Quarto. So I'm going to create a new file called new slideshow.qmd. And if I want to do a slideshow, I bet the best format that I recommend, you can actually output it to like a PowerPoint output, but I think that the easiest is to use the format Revealjs. And then basically we can have like title slides and then, section slides. And you can insert any sort of text in there, and if I run this, we see what we get. I could also add a title, a author, just like we could with the other types of docs. Another thing that's useful to do is we can change our theme. So I think there's like a dark theme. I'll share on the screen a list of the different theme options. But yeah, so we see now we have a dark theme. So maybe you're more of a fan of dark themes. With the Revealjs format too, you can easily go to a certain slide by clicking this bottom bar, and we have this progress bar that shows how far in the slideshow we are, which is pretty cool. So if I look up slide themes, Quarto, you see we have reveal themes, so you can do any of these available themes. And you can also customize them as you see fit too, if you want to. I'm playing around with this. So this is on presentation/revealjs/themes.html. Some things that I find particularly useful is, let's say you had a slideshow and you had some code in it. And let's say this does something like imports random for I in range 10. We output some random integer from 1 to 100. If I run this, we see the output of that right here. I could also include the code. I think if I do echo is true, we should be able to see the code alongside. So we see that, and nice, it automatically makes it compatible with the dark background. But one thing that's particularly cool is that we could also do something like Python, and then I think we do line, or let's see, I need to remember how to do this. I think it's line numbers equals 1. How about then 3 to 4? and run this. Okay, I messed it up. Let me just double check this. Okay, this should actually be code-line numbers. We can highlight certain codes at certain times. So I first highlight the first line, then I highlight lines 3 and 4. I could even then afterwards highlight all of my lines. So how about 1, 2, 4? So watch this. Highlight the first line, highlight the next lines, highlight all of the lines, etc. I think I could easily turn off the line numbers. So let's see, code line numbers. I could say that's false. So now if I run this, I think this is not working because this is actually still, this is a special class of Python. But if I ran the Python like this, we don't see the line numbers. If I make this true, we will see the line numbers. So this is the special class.python. Other things we could do is we could add lists. And we saw this previously, but you could do .incremental, show items 1 at a time with incremental list. Surround that with close that fence. Now if I run this, we see it shows item 1 at a time with the incremental list. We could also do this with other elements, so like images or something. So image fragments. I can specify things as fragments. So how about I specify an image. I can paste in some URL. I also could have these images locally. Paste in my URL. I'm going to add the dot fragment here. And then I can do a dot fade in. And if we look at this, we see that it now fades in. And we could do this with multiple Shreks. So I could do another Shrek and another Shrek. And I could, specify maybe that I wanted this to be a column layout. So I could do layout equals 33, 33, 33. And now instead, this will all be right next to each other instead of down. So cool. I could also say that I wanted maybe this one to fade in first. And so I would do a, I'm trying to think what the index is. So I could pass in a fragment index. I could say that this is 1. I think it's, if you pass this into all, I think it will, we'll make this 2. And then we'll make the first one that's actually, farthest on the left, we'll make this equal to 3. Run this. Middle one comes in first. The one on the right will come in second. And then the one on the left will come in third. I could also tie these together so that they fade in at the same time if they have the same index. So middle one's going to come in first. And then because now the left and right have the same index, they come in together. You could also optionally add, instead of doing a layout, you could add custom widths and stuff. So maybe this is 500 pixels. So we could say the width is 500 pixels. This should make a big Shrek over here on the right. It doesn't let me do the same. I guess we removed the order, but we got a bigger Shrek. I could also set the absolute position of some of these. So absolute, I could do top equals 50, left equals 50. I could make this one farther to the right. And I think to do that, I would do dot absolute, top equals left equals farther to the left. So we want it more to the right. So I think if we did left equals 500, this should be more to the right. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So this is pretty far to the right, the first thing to fade in. This next one should be farther to the left. We see it's kind of stacked. I could, set the width of one of these. 500 pixels. So you can do all sorts of organization of your images as you see fit. I always just look up, as I've kind of mentioned previously, I go to the guide. I look up the type of format that I'm working on, so Revealjs in this case, and I just see what what it shares with me there to see kind of my options. I also find that looking at gallery, presentations, as well as like this example presentation that they list here on the docs is super, super useful. You can check out the source code here. I'll also link it in the description. So you can see all sorts of different things that you can do. Okay, that's some of the basics on slideshows. So tying this together, we can actually create websites here with Quarto as well. So to do that, I recommend starting with the kind of index.qmd. So I'm going to just say, welcome to my website. Here you can find some Quarto examples. And then if we specify in our quarto.yaml file that this is a project of type website, and we give some website criteria here. And so I'm following all of this from the Quarto Docx website. So if we go to quarto.org/docs/websites, we see we can get some useful stuff here. I'm going to just copy this website stuff here. I'm going to paste it in. We can say our home page is equal to index.qmd. And now how about I do, so I could just render in an about page as this, but I'm going to pass in like how about HTML report. I'll pass in our PDF report. I don't know if the PDF report will work perfectly because it specifically needs to be HTML, but I could pass in our presentation.qmd. I could pass in our dashboard.qmd. And now if we go back to that web page, we see that we can do Quarto preview to see our website. So I'm going to do Quarto preview. And we see we get a website. I can click on so I guess it's giving the title based on what title each of these QMDs have. So like the movie data analysis, this is probably our dashboard. Oh no, this is our HTML report. We see that. If we go to our Quarto crash course, I think this is our slideshow. We see that on the web page. We can go to our dashboard. This is a different dashboard, but it's also included in the repo. All of this is on the website. This today, we could very easily, I think, change the title of our website. Oh, I guess the website was called today. So our first Quarto website. I could do another Quarto preview. We see that. We see our home page. The different sections. And you can look at the documentation. I would recommend doing that to see all of your different options and whatnot of what you can do with the websites, as well as like theming it when publishing it. So we could publish it the same way I could do, go to Posit Connect Cloud, link in the description, and specify I want to publish a Quarto and use primary file index.qmd, and we should have success doing that. So that is websites really, really quickly. Real quick, I want to just show a more advanced example of parameterized reporting, which is super, super useful in the real world. So let's say you are doing a country analytics report and you need to generate one for each country. We can do that via parameterized reports. And I'm going to just kind of show an example. So I'm creating a parameterized report.qmd, and we'll use our movie data set. So we'll start writing some Python code here. So this will be, I'm going to just call this top movies. And we'll make it a report based on all these different genres. And the format is HTML. And we need to now, because this is going to be parameterized, we need to have our parameters special syntax at the top. It's slightly different for R, but this is how we do it in Python. Tags, parameters, and then our only parameter here is maybe how about number or num movies and genre. And we'll close that. And then basically we'll have top movies in, and then I'll just say Python genre, top movies in genre, and then we need like 5 movies, so number 5, number 4, number 3, number 2, number 1, and in each of those, let's say we want a little bit more code here. I'm going to add my code to the top just so it's a little bit neater. So we need some code to get the top movies. So what we could do is we want to get our data frame, so import pandas as PD, df equals pd.read CSV, and it is specifically in data/tmdb small.csv. I'm going to just print df head real quick just to see what we're working with. I'm going to run this cell. Okay. Do we have a genre? So I'm going to actually print out df.columns. Rerun this cell. Genres. Okay, we have a genres. So let's look up what genres looks like. Oh, oops, I just wanted to run this cell. Okay, so it's like a string of, get out of here. Run this cell. It's like a string, so we only want one genre. I think we did this previously in this code. If I look at HTML report, there's a primary genre function, so I'm going to just copy that code. Primary genre, and then how about we also lowercase this? I don't know if it's already lowercased. So I'm going to real quick now look up primary genre dot unique. And I can run this cell again. Okay, so I got to do dot string dot lower. I just want to make sure they're all lowercased. Okay, we get this. So now we have a nice list to work off of. So I'm going to just paste this as a comment. Okay. And now if we want to just get those movies that are in a certain genre, we could do df genre equals when the primary genre is equal to the genre that we specify. And then the top movies in that genre are going to be this list. And we want to sort it. And this is autocomplete is doing great for us. We want to grab the head. So now let's look at our, I guess I'll call this top movies. Let's look at this real quick. Oh, genre is not defined. Run this real quick. Then run this cell. Okay, we got our top movies, I think. I'm going to actually do display. I think this should work. Oh, and popularity is not what we want to sort it by. We want to, I don't know what the popularity column is necessarily. I want to do vote average. Okay, so we see we get some movies. Are these sorted by genre? These are considered comedy? That's crazy for Parasite, or this, I don't know this one. Regardless, we can do, Python. It's going to be top movies dot loc 4, right? To get the 5th one. And then let's say we wanted to get the title from it. And maybe we wanted to also get the description. So you'll see this work in a second. So let's look at what our report looks like right now. I'm going to comment this line out temporarily. Just remove it real quick. I just want to see if this code is working to start. Okay. So we get that 5th video movie, A Dog's Will. And I could also add, what is the column called? With description. I want to look up the columns again. I'm looking for overview. That will work. So I could do something like surround this maybe with bold text. I think that this should work. And then maybe I add the description. Overview. Run this. Look at that. And then I could do, I want echo to be false. I don't want to see all this code on the screen. Look at that. And now we could copy basically the same code for all of our other reports. Make this 3, make this 3, make this 2, make this 2, make this 1, make this 1, and make this 0 and 0. And now we look at this, we run it, we get all of our different movies and like the descriptions of the movies. I love this Forrest Gump, great movie. And that's for comedy specifically, but cool thing is we could very easily go ahead and do a Quarto render parameterized report.qmd-p, and now we want to set, how about, so you could also play around with the number of movies. That would be, I guess, a challenge for here is how could you dynamically do all this instead of doing it kind of hard-coded like we have right now. So number of movies isn't really useful here yet, but genre, and now I make it, how about Western. We'll see this all update. So if I refresh this, we see the top movies in Western. We could even do something like genre.capitalize. Run this again. I just noticed that our Quarto YAML is still going crazy over here because we added the website stuff. So I'm just gonna remove that temporarily. Okay. We could run it again, doing genre equals, how about action? Or let's see what options we have. Action, that seems good. Refresh this. Top Gun Maverick. Actually, I don't know if I've seen Top Gun Maverick. That's pretty bad. Cool. And you could even do like a Python script now if you want to get really into it. I could do like generate all reports. I could run for, or like genres. Generate all reports.py, this should be called. Genres equals, in our parameterized report, we'll just copy all these genres. So we have a list of all these genres. Oh, shoot. You could print this out nicely as a list. I'm just going to do it manually as a one-time thing. Okay, so we have all of our genres. I could do a for I in genre, or for genre in genres. We could run the command insert Python code to run the command Quarto render parameterized report genre. So we could run this using the OS library, pass in the parameter, and we could also give it an output name. I forget exactly how to do output names. Let's just look up Quarto render -h. How do we give it a name? I think we do -- output. Let's see what output. Yeah, output. So we're going to do -- output, and we'll call this, how about genre.html. And this is an F string, so we're able to do this stuff. So now if I run this, we should be able to generate all of these reports. So we currently look at our output, we see, there's no special name or anything, but if I run this, parameterized, how do we spell that? Parameterized -report. Did I spell that correct? Come on, cross my fingers. Run this. We see it doing work. I'm going to open this up in the Finder. If we look at all of the new reports that we have, we see documentary.html, romance.html. So like, what are the top romance ones? Open that up. 5 Feet Apart, Gabriel's Inferno, never heard of it. If I open up War, what do we got there? Fury, Guy Ritchie's Covenant, 1917. So these are just based on the vote average, the top movies. If we look up animation, what do we have there? Cool. And yeah, you might want to maybe make something with like having to have a higher vote count too to really make this a more interesting reports, but it is really cool to see all of these different HTML reports that we have that we generated using this simple Python script in combination with Quarto. So that's some, a kind of advanced topic that I use a lot in the real world that can be super, super helpful with Quarto. All right, we covered a lot in this video. We covered, kind of the basics of setup and installation with Quarto, and then we started seeing how we can generate different types of outputs using the same QMD or IPython notebook files. This is only really scratching the surface of all the possibilities with Quarto, but I hope it's a good launching point that you can kind of build off of and take and adapt to your own projects. If there are certain topics that we didn't cover in this video that you would love to learn more about, we're always looking for recommendations, so leave those down in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, it would mean a lot if you like it, and also subscribe to the channel to not miss future videos like this one. Thank you all for watching. Until next time, peace out.